Thank you for joining us on this discussion of how service workers are building power and winning in the Windy City. Since the pandemic, restaurant workers have been leaving the industry in droves. Research by One Fair Wage reveals that 53% of restaurant workers surveyed are considering leaving the industry, and 70% cite low wages and tips as the primary reason for leaving. In the response to the staffing crisis, thousands of restaurants nationwide have raised their wages to get workers to attract and retain staff, but this measure is not enough. In Chicago, a worker-led movement is fighting for the better pay and improved working conditions. And they're winning. Thank you for joining us here today and hearing from these organizations and workers who are on the front line fighting, and to talk about how they're winning wage increases in the Windy City. I'd like to introduce our panelists and the discussion in some of their groundbreaking work and why it has been so critical for One Fair Wage to collaborate across states, worker-contractor sector, and different strategies and issues to take a comprehensive approach to radically shift wage justice. Saru Jayaraman, founder and president of One Fair Wage. She is an attorney, professor, author, and activist with over 20 years of experience and expertise in organizing workers and increasing their wages and bettering their working conditions. Ms. Haki Rhodes, One Fair Wage national lead organizer. Ms. Haki has been tip worker for over 10 years in the city of Chicago and a longtime activist and organizer with One Fair Wage Chicago, fighting with workers to increase their minimum wage and sharing and uplifting their voices to the public and those in leadership. Antoinette Simmons, One Fair Wage Chicago worker leader. She's worked in a restaurant and service industry for 15 years as wait staff and as a bartender. She has been a worker member leader with One Fair Wage for over 5 years, advocating for workers' rights in Chicago. Richard Rodriguez, treasurer of Our Revolution. Richard's deep-rooted passion for progressive politics has shaped his career in activism. With a background in labor advocacy, he understands the importance of fair wages and worker rights. Antonio Lightfoot, Deputy Director of Workers Center for Racial Justice, which focuses on the unique intersection of workers' rights and criminal justice reform. Antonio is responsible for base building and leadership development, mobilizing thousands of members across the state of Illinois to participate in legislative advocacy. This panel will discuss how Chicago workers are winning and building power to demand one fair wage increases with tips on tops for all workers. I will direct questions to each of our panelists and then give you guys a minute or two to respond. Starting with Saru. Share with us the history of the sub-minimum wage. How does the sub-minimum wage affect workers in Chicago today? And how is the One Fair Wage campaign in Chicago moving workers to a one fair wage?
Good morning. How's everybody doing? Thanks, Nakia. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes. Great. How many people were with us last night for the Mayor Server for an hour event? Oh, not everybody. Okay, great. So thank you for joining us, those who came. We're experiencing this incredibly historic moment. And I think I'm gonna let the amazing Chicago people definitely tell you a lot more about Chicago, but I wanted to be able to set the context for how historic this is nationally in terms of both the history of the issue and, frankly, the history of our fight, which has been a very long, painful, traumatic 20 years of fight, to set the stage for how incredible what's happening in Chicago right now is. So look, the restaurant industry has been the largest and fastest growing private sector employer in the United States and in Illinois, everywhere really, for decades. It was 14 million workers pre-pandemic. That was 1 in 10 American workers. But it's been the absolute lowest paying employer for generations, dating all the way back to emancipation. Pre-emancipation, tipping as a practice originated in feudal Europe. It was something that aristocrats, so dukes, earls, nobles, I guess people's most popular reference to this now is Bridgerton. If you think about those times in feudal Europe, there were aristocrats, they had servants. The servants got actual full wages, unlike tipped workers today. The servants in feudal Europe got full wages. tips were an extra or a bonus that aristocrats gave to those serfs and vassals, but always on top of a wage, never instead of a wage. That idea of tipping came to the US in the late 1850s, or actually early 1850s, and it was rich Americans traveling to Europe, coming back, trying to show off that they knew the rules of Europe, and Americans resoundingly rejected the idea. In fact, 7 states banned tipping because they said this is a vestige of feudalism, we're a democracy, we reject this idea. And that populist movement that banned tipping in 7 states spread to Europe, and the labor movement picked it up in Europe with the rallying cry of, we are professionals, we don't live on your tips, which is why tipping is not as prevalent in Europe. People get livable wages. You know, in the Copenhagen airport, fast food workers get $21 an hour, full service workers get 22, 23, plus any tips. The tips are not that prevalent. So that idea spread to Europe. We got rid of tipping in Europe, but in the United States, we went in the exact opposite direction because of a series of events that Chicago is at the center of. So in 1853, waiters who were mostly white men didn't get any tips, only wages. Here in Chicago, but also Boston and Philly and New York, went on strike for higher wages. And in response, restaurants were so angry, they did not want to give these guys higher wages. They started replacing them, first with white women, who they thought they could pay less to. And then in 1865, after emancipation, as black workers who were newly freed started coming to places like Chicago and New York, they said, oh, sure, we're going to hire you, and you're going to live on this marvelous new thing that's come from Europe called tips. And of course, they did it to two sets of workers. They hired black men as porters on trains, particularly the Pullman Company, and they hired the black women as restaurant workers, servers, bartenders. And they told both sets of folks, you're going to have this amazing privilege of obtaining white people's tips. And you know the history here in Chicago that the Pullman car porters organized and won the right to an actual wage rather than living on tips, organized and won the right to the first black union in the United States and the right to a wage. And what I find so incredible is that people in labor and the progressive movement and racial justice look at that and say, wonderful, amazing. And in the same breath, we have accepted the same thing for women in the restaurant industry for 150 years. Because when the black men got their wage, the black women did not. They were told, you're gonna live only on tips. And in fact, the National Restaurant Association was founded right here in Chicago, that had impacts nationally, right here in Chicago, in response to the Pullman. They saw those Pullman car porters organizing. They said, oh, we don't want that to happen to the women we've hired. So they formed the National Restaurant Association to clamp down on restaurants. The black women were not so lucky at the time. There was no union for them. The waitresses union of the time would not allow black workers to join. And so they actually won 20 years later in 1938, when the New Deal happened and everybody got the right to a federal minimum wage for the first time. This National Restaurant Association, founded right here in Chicago, succeeded in getting tipped workers who were mostly black women excluded from the first federal minimum wage that passed as part of the New Deal. So everybody else got the right to a federal minimum wage, but black women were told, no. If you get tips, no wage for you. And we went from $0 in 1938 to $2.13 an hour today. That is the current federal minimum wage for tipped workers in the United States of America. Now, of course, Illinois is somewhat higher, but still a sub-minimum wage, and Illinois continues to be one of 43 states that persists with this legacy of slavery. There are 7 states that got rid of this many decades ago: California, Oregon, Washington, Nevada, Minnesota, Montana, and Alaska. But with these 43 states, we have forced a population that still to this day is overwhelmingly women, disproportionately women of color, to struggle with the highest rates of poverty and sexual harassment of any industry because they have to put up with so much to get those tips. Now, that was pretty bad pre-pandemic. But as Nakia mentioned, with the pandemic, it just became unlivable. And that is why I'm so frustrated with the press. I'm going to say at a communications conference, I am so frustrated with the headline, "The Great Resignation is over." We are going through historic times in the restaurant industry. There was a fabulous guest essay in the New York Times during the pandemic. I don't know how many of you saw it. It was by a historian writing about the bubonic plague and worker shortages after the bubonic plague. After the bubonic plague in medieval Europe, people, elites, bourgeoisie said, "Oh, there's a shortage, but don't worry, it'll all settle down. People will come back to work." Everybody said, that was the common sense. People will come back to work. People died, it's okay, people will come back to work. But what started as worker shortages evolved over decades into worker strikes, worker revolts. So what we are experiencing right now in terms of a moment of increased worker power and leverage may not be a blip, may not be just now, may not be over, may actually be evolving into a fundamental change in the way low-wage work exists in America or not. It could be we're going through a moment where workers are finally refusing forever to work for these wages ever again. We cannot think of this as a blip or something very temporary or a couple of years. Depending on how we react to it, how we uplift it, how we talk to workers about it, it could be a permanent change. Because what we saw with the pandemic is 1.2 million workers leave the restaurant industry. Of those who remain, 60% say they are leaving. Of the 300,000 workers who came to us for relief, 80% say the only thing that would make me stay or come back is a full livable wage with tips on top. People are being very clear. I am leaving because these wages are too low. I won't come back because these wages are too low. I won't come back until I'm guaranteed a full livable wage with tips on top. And we ask them, is it COVID? Is it childcare? Is it blah, blah, blah? No, it is the wage. The industry is facing the worst staffing crisis in its industry. The National Restaurant Association's major response is going around trying to weaken child labor laws so they can get children to work as serving alcohol. They're trying to make it so that minors can serve alcohol. And what is our response? Our response is, this is the most historic frickin' moment in the United States. This is the moment that could change everything in terms of income inequality and the way the economy works. And so we have to go big. So we launched something last year called 25 by 250. After 20 years of fighting to end the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers and getting rolled over and beat up by the Restaurant Association, my kids' pictures being put up on attack websites and being followed around the country and getting death threats and even sometimes our own progressive allies not standing with us. After 20 years of pain, we are finally winning because the marketplace has changed and workers are refusing to work for these wages. And so we said it's time to go big. We launched something called the 25 by 250 campaign. We're moving bills and ballot measures in 25 states by the United States 250th anniversary. We just won in DC. We just won in Michigan. We're putting this on the ballot in 5 states next year, including 3 battleground states, where this is not just going to pass, it's going to drive millions of low-wage workers to the polls for the presidential and Senate races in a way that no candidate, no party, no canvassing is going to do. People are going to go to vote themselves a raise way more. As much as we might love Sherrod Brown, they're going to vote themselves a raise and vote for Sherrod Brown while they're there in that order. They're not going to go for Sherrod Brown. I'm sorry to say. And he knows it. He knows it. And he's working with us as a result of it. And so we are putting this on the ballot in 5 states. But this year, everything's going to start in the place where it all began. In the place where this history started. We're going to win this thing because people here won something incredible in terms of a shift in politics. And so I'll let them speak about it. A bill's being introduced next week. We're going to pass this by September here in Chicago. It's going to follow with county and state. It's happening, and this is going to be the kickoff for so many states to follow.
Amazing.
Yes.
Would any of our panelists like to respond or just even chime in on how that has brought you to collaborate with One for Wage and the impact it has had with your organization as well?
Yep.
Yeah. So my name is Nataki Rose. I'm a National League organizer here in Chicago. Born and raised here in Chicago. Raised my son and my grandson as well. Excuse me. I have been a tip worker in Chicago for over 15 years, and that's like making $4.95. I started with the two of last administrations, and exactly, and I have been through hell and back from this with this industry, from sexual harassment here, from getting low wages. I just can remember one night just realizing that I did not make any tips. I was working at the bar, Laristos. I had and that's another thing with tip workers. We always have 2 or 3 jobs. Why do you have to have 2 or 3 jobs just to make a living? That just used to baffle me. Like, I gotta leave one bar to go to the restaurant, to go to Gibson's. And the thing about Gibson's, they had all the restaurants right there. So you got Gibson's, the Lux Bar, Cortino's. So I'm going from Gibson, Lux Bar, Cortino's. And I'm like, why am I having 3 jobs? Like, I gotta work 3 jobs here in Chicago, always trying to face evictions. And this administration, the first administration, he went up $8.40. I mean, it went up from $4.95 to it started increasing to $6.95, and then it went to $8.40. With Ronnie Manuel administration. Then he put oh, I'm doing something. We're gonna go to 15. Blah blah blah, and everyone's like, oh, we're going to 15. But then it's still left us tip workers out, still struggling, still facing enormous bill crisis ourselves before the pandemic. And then we get the next mayor in. And then she tells us the same thing. She's gonna help this and this and this and this and that, while we're still struggling. We face inflation. Everybody, restaurant owners say they face inflation. Well, we face inflation too. We face high taxes too. So if we facing here in Chicago 9.75, you all not the only one paying. We paying it too. When they raise the rent and can raise it and give me late fees and everything, all of that I felt. And to find an organization that actually took that strain and that stress off of me to hey, it's a whole system that's built up working against you. It's not like you need to get another job. You need to get another certificate. Do you know yesterday the restaurant owner said that what I invested to wasn't a profession? I'm serious. I was in Evanston. And they literally told me that I was not a professional. And they told me that the certifications that I had to go get, the hospitality training I had to go get, they told me yesterday, oh, that's not no education. You ain't gonna get no education. Service bartenders, that's people that's college students and people that got no experience. And so basically you saying you don't man exploiting us then. So you're on the man exploiting people that don't have education, basically. People that look like me, you're on man exploiting. Black women, Hispanic women, women of color, immigrants. The immigrants that just came here. Just think about all the busload of immigrants that just got dropped off here in Chicago. Just think about how the Restaurant Hotel Association went on TV and said, oh, please hurry up and give them their work permits. Give them the work so they can come to the hotel, so they can come work. Okay, so now you went from exploiting black people, Hispanic people, now you finna exploit all the people from Texas that's coming in Chicago, that's gonna make low wages. And then you tell me that this is not a profession, but you want professional treatment when you're at Applebee's, when you're at Gibson's. You're expecting me to act like a professional then. But yesterday, I was told that I was not a professional. to my face. Am I correct? They told me that.
Yes.
And it hurt because I've been in this industry. I raised my son, my grandson on these low wages. And I worked in Evanston. And my son went to school in Evanston. I bust my ass for my son to go to Orrington. He went to Davis. He went to Evanston Township. You know? And they told me yesterday, oh, that was a union job working at Northwestern, at Sinker Hall, when I still wasn't making no money. I worked at Dixie Kitchen. Yeah, I worked all up in Evanston. Yeah, I did. All just busting my tail working in Evanston. So my son and I can have a flexible schedule. So for me to, and then they talk about educated. No, I got empowered. When I found out that the fight started here in Chicago, when I met the owner of the Pullman's Museum, when I found the history and that the amazing Philip A. Randolph started here in Chicago and organized. And now I know what my fight is real. And so even though the insults yesterday, that really empowered me to know that I'm doing the right thing and I'm on the right path. And so I'd rather be on the right side of history than on the wrong side of history. And so this is about correcting history, making that history correct. If it started here in Chicago, then this history, that type of racism, slave wages, low talking, because just like I'm a woman, they will talk to your children just like that when they go. And then the guy said, well, me and my workers is a family. And you know what I said? I need to let them, do your workers know that you think that they're not professionals? Do they know, do the workers need to be here to see how you talk about them and how you say the labor costs, this costs, this costs. It costs us too to ride the CTA, to get on the train, $4.35 for gas. All of this parking tickets, boots. Like, come on now. They in it. But we workers are actually sending your kids to soccer, private school, and everything off the backs of me, her, and our fight. I didn't get to privilegely send my son to a private school. I had to work 3 jobs, get tips, do this, just so my son could get to private school at Hale Francis. So it's been a struggle for me, myself, colleagues across the country. I met workers in Flint, Michigan, workers in New York, workers in all over that I have been. And so, like, this is a real story. This is a real matter that we can resolve, because as the mayor say, if we got a issue, then what's the resolution? And so the solution is one fair wage, and to stop degrading, to stop the degrade of workers here, because we work with dignity. I don't just come to your table like, because you won't give me nothing. But for you to say that I'm not a professional, and this is what we face, and for an owner to say that, you know, we must change the course and the way they think. Once we change it here in Chicago, it's gonna change. It's gonna have a effect around the United States. And so I'm gonna stop right there.
Thank you, Nataki.
And let Jewel speak,
please.
because I do get emotional talking about this. And it was something that somebody told me yesterday. Like, I wasn't a professional. I haven't heard that, and that just struck me to a core.
Yeah.
We can find out.
We can find out.
Evanston owner, she said she owned like 16 restaurants in Evanston.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Ooh. Oh well, it looks like she's gonna be out of business real soon.
We need to get the
Antoinette,
yeah.
please.
Yes, I will. So, as Nataki was speaking, I was just thinking about how we do this industry, the restaurant industry, devaluate, not value our labor here in the city and all over the world. And it's so important that we do make the change. And the change is that we have to change for the generation to come. And before I get into my story, I'm going to talk about how we were in Ohio getting the petition signed. And as I was down there, I ran into a worker. She was up in age, and she talked about how she only got paid $2. Okay? And that was it. And then to find out that some of the restaurant owners, we ran into some of those as well, wanted to keep them stuck in receiving $4 and $2. I'm talking about Bob Evans restaurants down there. So it isn't fair, but it's up to us now to make the correction and change this as we move into the future. It's up to us, and we're going to do what we have to do. No, all my experiences working as wait staff, working in the hospitality industry wasn't always well. I had to deal with harassment most of the time, bartending, and doing that during the pandemic. It got really ugly, okay? Just like you're sitting up there with your mask on, sir, you had to sit at the table with your mask on. Then we had to take on the responsibility. I'm not a security guard. I shouldn't have to tell you to keep your mask on until I bring you your drink or bring you your food. You should be free. No, I had to deal with you. You're going to pay me a tip, but you really don't want me to tell you to put your mask back on. So yeah, you get cussed out in between that language, but I better make sure I make you a good drink and bring your food, and you may give me something and you may not. And then you may ask me, Jewel, can you pull your mask down so I can see you? So that wasn't appropriate, but those things happened, okay? And then what happens with a worker like me? I don't want to come back. I need a better wage. At that time, I was making $9 with tips on top. Okay, and sometimes we had to divide it amongst the other staff. And I'm like, well, Jewel, that girl didn't make no tip, but I ain't say nothing. I was happy to share. I'm just being real, okay? So the biggest thing and the biggest fight is that we have to stand our grounds for Illinois to make change. As our young people are completing college, they might not get a job right away. We need that 15 and a little bit more. I know July 1st, what's our person? Board member. What's her name? She sit on the board, commissioner. Tony Pratt Winkle. I work with so many of them in the industry. And so it was said that we passed $15.90. Really, it was like, what, $9 added on to we already had. Am I right? I got that right? Okay, just let me know if I got that right. So we do know it's still not enough, but we're moving forward. Also, with the cost of living, okay? Each year, you all know that it's the cost of living. The restaurant industry is a billion-dollar industry. It shouldn't be nobody talking about why I shouldn't stay on board. I might want to work there for the rest of my life, but if I could, I would, but it's not designed for me to do that. However, when we leave and we don't come back, things collapse. Okay, now they trying to do the robot thing. That's not working. No one wants to be talking and waiting for their food and then don't get the order right. That's an issue. We still need human touch, and that's that part. So stand with us. I think it's July 19th. We're going to be down in Springfield.
No, we're going to be
What's it-
at the
where we
City
gonna
Hall.
be? City Hall, right, in
sorry.
City Hall. Because y'all been adding, y'all been sending me all type of stuff. Right, and we're going to be in City Hall, and we're
Yes.
going to take care of the business. And
Yeah.
that's all I want to say. I ain't want to talk about how ugly, but it was ugly for me during the pandemic. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, City Hall.
City Hall.
Antonio, I want to give you a second to chime in as well, but I also want to ask a question. Why has the Chicago Worker Center for Racial Justice decided to prioritize this issue? And what makes it a core racial justice issue for your organization?
Okay, so first I'd like to respond to Nataki. So thanks for sharing your story. I think you give a real bold, deep look into how the service industry treat tip workers and how you have to go from job to job, because all we hear is like the glamorous, it's like a miseducation of like a glamorous lifestyle of tip workers who making hundreds of dollars per day, and that's simply not the case.
It's not the case.
It's not. Like most people, I worked as a tip worker myself, and delivering pizzas. And what they don't tell you is that sometimes people don't tip, and you're still on the clock getting a tipped wage, and it's not being made up. Additionally, you can be in the restaurant making pizzas and still getting that tipped wage until the pizza order is called. So this system is just ripe for abuse, and any capitalist restaurant that can't afford the standard minimum wage shouldn't be in business. They just don't have a good business. Right.
Agreed.
They don't deserve our dollars.
Well, only a lot of closing.
And here's the funny thing about the restaurant association, the restaurants in general. They give themselves raises every year. When's the last time you saw something on the dollar menu? Do those even exist anymore? Right? So capitalism is out of hand, and that's why at the Worker Center for Racial Justice we are prioritizing this issue, because we work at the intersection of criminal justice reform and workers' rights, and we have a campaign called Dignity at Work. And whenever you are able to, so we're born in this capitalistic society. Nobody chose it, but we're all here. Unfortunately, we all have to work. And when you can take away somebody's wage and keep them from advancing in this system that we all born into, you strip them of their dignity. And we often do this by labels. Tipped worker, formerly incarcerated person, domestic worker. We use these labels to affect our most marginalized people, so then we can be considered lesser thans, and that's simply not the case. So we have to start putting just calling things what it is. It's racism, it's sexism, it's capitalism. And I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
You answered the first part, though.
Okay.
Why has your organization prioritized the issue, and what makes it a core racial justice issue for your organization?
So we're a statewide organization, but we're in Chicago for a few reasons. One, we are privileged to have a progressive mayor, now right now things still have to come,
Yes.
and an increasingly progressive city council. But we don't want to stop there. Like, Chicago has always been a historic place for workers, right? Not only the Pullman Porters leading to the minimum wage, but also the Haymarket riots, which led to the 8-hour workday. So this is the place to be. I know that this happened in many places around the country. So we're behind the times. That's not like Chicago. We don't need to be that way. We need to be leaders on the workforce.
Right.
And at the Worker Center for Racial Justice, we prioritize all workplace issues, especially when you're stripping people, marginalized people, Black people, Latinx people, women of their dignity.
Thank you, Antonio. Richard, I also want to give you a chance to respond to any of what was just discussed, but also, why is our revolution prioritizing this issue? What makes it such a core economic justice issue that is so universally popular?
First off, good morning, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to be here for this panel, and thank you all for the efforts and the work that you have been doing. And Nataki, thank you for sharing your story. Once again, my name is Richard Rodriguez, the treasurer of Our Revolution. It's a spinoff of Bernie Sanders' 2016 campaign. We mobilize millions of activists across the country. We prioritized one fair wage as a cornerstone of economic justice, where dignity, fairness, and opportunity intersect, and where every worker is valued and empowered to thrive. It's a core value, right? One fair wage embodies the principles of economic justice, and it transcends political affiliations. It's a rallying cry that resonates deeply within people from all walks of life, because it addresses a fundamental inequality within our current system. I want to share with you a story too. When I was in Ohio, I had an opportunity to gather signatures with One Fair Wage. And crisscrossing throughout the state, we had an opportunity to meet people in rural communities and in urban communities. And it didn't matter if you were a far-right Republican that wanted to overtake the government. And I quite literally mean it. Like, he was like very proud to say he wish he could have been there at that moment. And it blew my mind that I'm having a conversation with this gentleman about economic justice, right? As a far left-wing socialist, right? And sharing that moment with him made me realize that this issue is an issue that is not a red issue, a blue issue, an independent issue. It's, it's economic justice. And it doesn't matter if you're white, black, brown, Asian, it transcends all of that. And as a political movement, this issue, I think, is an underlining that is going to transform America in a better place, in a better society, like Saru was mentioning earlier. That I think things have boiled up to a point where people are ready to be mobilized. And that gentleman that I was talking to in a Walmart parking lot, didn't even really realize it, but we're talking about the same things. We're talking about being able to provide for your family. I'll share with you one more story. While I was crisscrossing another Walmart parking lot, another Republican woman came out and really wanted to let me have it. And boy, she did. She was, talking about Bernie Sanders like no other, and Donald Trump. And after having that conversation with her, she started to open up. We started to talk about her life. She talked about having to go into Walmart because she didn't have running water and she couldn't afford it. And we talked about economic justice, and we talked about raising the minimum wage in her state and livable wages, what that means to her and her family. And at the end of the conversation, she's crying and I'm hugging her, and it didn't matter that I was a leftist socialist, Bernie Sanders guy out there talking about economic justice with her, but this issue, transcends those political lines. So our revolution has been proud to work with One Fair Wage, and we're excited about the opportunity for people, right, to be able to have a livable wage. I was reading an article today that Saru just shared with me on the way up here. Here in Chicago in 2022, let me just really quick so I don't get it wrong. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, the servers in Chicago area made an average hourly wage of $15.52, included reported tips. That's the average, $15.52, with tips. So what we're talking about in Chicago is raising the minimum wage with tips on top. That's going to make a significant difference in people's lives, and numbers don't lie, right? In Chicago, in order to be able to afford a two-bedroom apartment, you have to make $25 an hour. Is that right? That's the statistic that came out. Those don't equal out. You can't afford to live here. You hear Nataki talking about having to work 3 jobs, right, to be able to survive. That ain't right, right? We're talking about young people out in our streets today causing havoc because they don't have anything to do. We got to give them meaningful work. We got to give them dignity, right? We got to give them fairness. We got to give them opportunity. And when you do that, that's going to bring transformational change in our society. Young people are going to go to work. They're going to have respect. They're going to have, they're going to be able to provide. They're going to feel like they're going to be able to provide for their moms. They're going to be able to provide for their grandfathers. They're going to be able to provide. They're going to be able to keep the lights on. And it's not just young people. These are single moms. There's young fathers, right? Being able to try to provide for their family. It's just, they need that opportunity. And I don't want to, put a nail in a coffin with you. We've all said it here over and over. But if you're a business and you can't pay the minimum wage, what are you doing? What's your business model?
For real.
Think about it. This is the only industry in America today. What makes them so special that they don't have to be able to, participate like every other business, just because they serve food? So the person that makes the shoes and sells the shoes next door, Why don't, they're not carved out. It's ridiculous. It's a system that's been built around a legacy of slavery, period. And those systems need to be rooted out and put away and put to rest. So our revolution is proud to stand with one fair wage. We're eager for the work that's going to transform our society.
Thank you. I wanted to give an opportunity for the audience to ask any questions.
Question. You mentioned the sub-minimum wage, and every time I think of that as a person with hidden disabilities, I think quite often of the horrible so-called sheltered workshops, which thankfully are going to the scrap heap of history in places, such as, the New England area, such as Vermont. We need also to be reaching out to people in the disability community as such, because many people with disabilities are poor, like myself, and I just got terminated after 2 months as a security guard, because I, raised my voice over not being able to, I got real frustrated over not being able to find, where my coworkers were going to be at, and it was, horrible, when I, didn't get the understanding I needed, and and there was a law enforcement officer who kept promising me that I was going to get a chair to sit down in. I've been having some pain in my left side, as if, the pain in my right knee, which I was having at the Target Center for the 1.5 days that I lasted working for minimum wage, of which I, quit after that. And, you weren't allowed to strike. And the union was in bed with, literally in bed, if you will, with
Management.
management. And they did nothing for me.
Yeah.
I thought, the hell with you then.
You are somebody.
Right, you are, yeah.
You are.
And I believe we're doing something.
Yeah, we.
Disabled.
Yeah, so we, when, I want to tell you a quick story, we had been fighting, just like you just mentioned, for 18 years to try to get tipped workers included in overall minimum wage increases. The Fight for 15, in a lot of states like Illinois, when it passed, tipped workers were the kind of negotiating point. We were the leverage. We were the pawn thrown under the bus so that everybody else could go up to 15. So finally in 2019, we had a moment of victory. We got finally included in a bill that passed in the U.S. House of Representatives. It was like game-changing. The first time in U.S. history that either House of Congress moved to end the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers. At that time when that happened, workers with disabilities were included in that bill. Youth were included in that bill, but we looked around and said, who's left? And we saw actually that gig workers and incarcerated workers still don't get, people who are doing work inside still get a sub-minimum wage because of the exception to the 13th Amendment that allows for slavery in the case of incarceration. So at that moment, we actually decided one fair wage has to be about ending all sub-minimum wages in the U.S. If there is a minimum wage, that word minimum has to actually mean what we think the word minimum means, which is that nobody earns less. And if there is anybody earning a sub-minimum, it's because we, over time, have valued them as subhuman. And I wrote a whole book about it, and each chapter is a different sub-minimum wage. There's a chapter on a worker with disabilities. There's a chapter on incarcerated workers. There's a chapter on gig workers. There's a chapter on restaurant workers. There's other tipped workers like Uber and Lyft drivers. But we decided that one fair wage means one fair wage. Everybody gets a minimum wage. And so we expanded our fight, our ballot. Where we can put it on the ballot, we end all sub-minimum wages. In Ohio, Michigan, and Arizona, we've got ballot measures to end sub-minimum wages for tipped workers, workers with disabilities, and youth. Where we move things legislatively, it's freaking frustrating because you have to go piece by piece. raise the wage and the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers and the sub-minimum wage for, it's harder. That's why we love putting things on the ballot, because we get to define who gets included in minimum wage. But I want to tell you, I'm really excited because, as you said, there are a number of states starting to end the sub-minimum wage for workers with disabilities. There are now finally states ending the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers. But that final frontier, we finally have a bill moving in the state of California that's to raise the overall minimum wage to $23 an hour and end the last sub-minimum wage for incarcerated workers. And it's got to start in California, because a third of our firefighting workforce saving our asses from those wildfires are people who are getting 8 to 11 cents an hour, dying as they fight our wildfires. And so we are so excited. It's the first time we brought together a coalition of criminal justice and worker justice groups to fight for a unified living wage for all. And that, to me, is the model of where we're headed in terms of federal minimum wage. It's got to be the next time we have a chance, which we think is 2027, it's got to be a minimum wage that's closer to a living wage, which is, by that point, going to be a minimum of 20, and ending all sub-minimum wages, including tipped, workers with disabilities, youth, gig, and incarcerated workers. Nobody left behind.
Yes.
We had some back and forth. We led that. We were the ones in the middle of that fight, and it was very ugly, yes.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, given that kind of ping pong between, the initiative and then actually getting it to the table, can you just talk about, what state or city you think you guys implemented the best strategy in, and then how can that be applied to what's happening in Chicago? And then also just mention 5 states that are now
7 states.
7 states.
Yeah. So 7 states have already done this. California, Oregon, Washington, Nevada, Minnesota, Montana, and Alaska already ended the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers. There's another list of states that ended the sub-minimum wage for workers with disabilities. So I can give you the whole map, but we now have 25 states where this is moving in terms of bills to raise wages and end sub-minimum wages across the country. And I mentioned Michigan is on its way, and Washington, D.C., we finally had a resounding vote, 75%. So we won this 3 times. We won it in 2014, we won it in 2018, we won 56% of the vote. The council members overturned it, and we got them out. They had to leave because they overturned democracy, the will of the people. We came back, and voters were like, 20 percentage points more, 76% of the vote in D.C. So I would say D.C. is a massive, resounding victory for democracy and for the will of the people. And as Richard said, you take this anywhere in the country, red or blue states, when you ask people, and I like them, I like Jewel and Nataki and Richard, I was in Ohio too, we were all out there collecting signatures, and you talk to people like far right, and you say, should people who work in restaurants get a full minimum wage with tips on top? Most people say, I thought they already were getting the full minimum wage with tips on top. And if not, then they say, oh, hell yeah, of course. I don't want my tips going towards their wage. I want my tips on top of the wage. So it's overwhelmingly popular. And I would say DC is a success. I would say that's a good example for Chicago. It's going up. It's already started going up. And I think the reason Chicago is so historic is because most of our wins to date, because this is such a hard fight with the Restaurant Association, and let's name what's really been happening. Democrats have been bought by the Restaurant Association, and that is why we have not won this in blue states.
Absolutely.
And it's been such a hard fight because Democrats have been bought by the Restaurant Association at the federal level, at the state level, at the city level. So Chicago is so historic because it's the first place where it's not going to happen through the ballot, because we can't put it on the ballot here. It's the first place where elected officials, because they are true progressives who, for the first time I've ever seen, are standing up to the Restaurant Association, are finally going to pass this on behalf of the will of the people.
Yes.
It's incredible.
Wow. No.
We think we have the votes to, we know we have the votes to win, yeah.
I was gonna say in Chicago and in Illinois, we have like a different fight in our hand. It's usually not, especially in Chicago, they don't run on Democrat versus Republican ballots, so people don't have a party affiliation on the city level. Well, so in this last election, I think there were 14 new electeds. So we did a good job. The community came out and knocked doors for, and a lot of folks on this panel knocked doors for either our progressive mayor or progressive alderman. And while I won't name a lot of them, well, I won't name any, I can't think of any to name right now. It's not just Democrats, right? We are fighting against Democrats. Some of them who are Republicans posing as Democrats because they're in the city of Chicago. So it's not about party affiliation. It's about folks with restaurants in their district, which is a lot. It's about folks who just don't have the guts to stand up to the Illinois Restaurants Association. And
right.
we can literally have conversations with them and hear Sam Toya's rhetoric
That's
coming
right.
out their mouth.
That's right, the head of the Illinois restaurant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can look at any election in any state. Progressives are winning up and down the ballot, from city councils to mayor races to county board races to school board races. Progressives are winning. You look at you want to find out the names, look at the primaries, and then you look at the growth of the progressive caucus here in the city of Chicago. And you can see, and even if you look at if you want to look up more names, look up the names that lost in Washington D.C.
Yeah.
Those are the names that
I
you're
can
looking
tell
for
you
that were
those
impediments to what we're pushing, and that message should be loud and proud for Democrats across the country. That to get on board, the time is now for you to listen to the progressive values, listen to your constituents. People power is more powerful than the big dollars that you're getting from multinational corporations or these big businesses. It's not making the difference in elections. And I think they're starting to figure it out because grassroots movements, from progressive grassroots movements, from one block to the next block, to the next block, to the next block, we're organizing and we're winning.
Just want to say, the last election, thank you to the Workers Center for Racial Justice and Nataki's incredible work and Our Revolution, so many other great organizations, Working Families Party. The progressives grew to 22 of 50 votes in the city council. You need 26 votes to pass. Those 22 members of the Progressive Caucus on Tuesday night voted unanimously to support our one fair wage bill. We are going to win. We have the votes to win.
We have time for one or two more questions. I definitely want to get yours.
Thank you. Michelle Shunker, Revolving Door Project. I just want to applaud all the work that you all are doing, and Professor Jairam, you're one of my favorite professors.
Thank you.
My question is, you sort of touched on this with the congressional aspect, but are there things that the executive branch could be doing? Could President Biden, sign an executive order to address mistreatment of restaurant workers? Could the Labor Department, the NLRB, was wondering
Yeah.
if you could speak on that.
He did. I will say he did one thing that he could do, which is he signed an executive order for all federally contracted workers to get not only 15 but end the sub minimum wage for any federally contracted tipped workers and workers with disabilities. So he did do that piece. It's a very tiny population of workers. The other thing we think he can and should be doing, and maybe could do on the campaign trail, since everybody's already campaigning, is that we've got a massive list, happy to share with anybody in the room, that we track every day, over 5,000 and growing restaurants that have voluntarily transitioned from $2 or $3 or $5 an hour to paying $15, $20, $25 an hour. I want you to know how significant this is. I am seeing restaurants in Mississippi and Texas that used to pay $2, now paying $20 and $25 an hour plus tips, 1,000% wage increases, because workers are saying, I can't work for 2 or 5 or 15, I need 25. And so Biden on the campaign trail should be visiting restaurants that are now paying $25 an hour, uplifting them and saying, look, they're doing it, everybody's doing it, this should be the law. That's an easy thing he would do. I've been trying to talk to administration about it. It's been very slow.
Any last questions before we close it out and let each of our guests or from our organizations do final calls to action? Yes.
Yay!
Extremely gerrymandered legislature, right? That in fact is working overtime to make it harder to pass ballot measures.
You mean like like change of politics, like candidates and that kind of thing as a result of these wins?
not so much like electorally, but just in terms of policy.
Yeah, in red states. Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen an issue like this on the ballot change a state from, you know, red to blue. But we have seen in multiple states, you know, this issue get masses, hundreds of thousands of people engaged that are not engaged. You know, restaurant workers have a 12% voter engagement. In Ohio, in Michigan, it's about 12%. We've seen that go up 300% to about 40% engaged, meaning vote and get engaged as a result of this issue being on the ballot. Because, look, these workers have been excluded over and over and over again. So when you tell them, go vote for a Democrat, go for Biden, go vote for whoever, they're like, for what? I work 3 jobs. If I take time out to vote, I get penalized or I lose my tips, and I have not seen any change under Democratic administrations. My wage has stayed the same for 30 years, literally. And so putting their issue directly on the ballot gets them engaged like nothing else, and then that creates the possibility for us to have majorities, you know, people engaged in ways that could move politics and other issues. We have seen, you know, we've been able to get Republicans out in Michigan. I do think a lot of this issue played a big role in flipping Michigan blue, trifecta blue. I mean, you can talk to the former head of the Michigan Democratic Party. He'll tell you this issue had played a big role in flipping Michigan. So I think Ohio, I mean, maybe I'm naive, but I know I'm naive, but we've been winning on things that people said we were very naive about 20 years ago. Could we ever get 100% for tipped workers? They said no, and we're getting it. And so I think this issue could flip Ohio in a way that, you know, could actually help us change policy on other issues. If we actually, if Democrats in Ohio stood with the minimum wage on the ballot in November, I think people would associate minimum wage with these Democratic candidates and vote for them. What happened in Florida, y'all know. $15 was more popular than Trump or Biden on the ballot in November 2020. Passed overwhelmingly. Tipped workers got $13.50. But the Democratic Party made a decision not to associate with the $15 minimum wage. And so people are like, well, it doesn't help Democrats. I can tell you why. If you don't stand with the minimum wage, if you're not out there loud and proud collecting signatures with us and campaigning on it, it's not going to help flip the state. But it can if working people see you as a working people's person.
That's so true. Yeah.
Thank you. Antonio, I want to start with you on any last or final calls to action that you want to make before we close out, and then I go to Richard and then Saru.
Okay, sure. The first thing I want to say is this is just the beginning. So once we pass this in Chicago, we will be going for the entire state of Illinois.
Yes.
Because that's going to make the biggest impact, right? We're not shortchanging Chicago, but it does need to be done in the state of Illinois. So if you live in the state of Illinois or if you're visiting, please visit our website, centerforracialjustice.org, center, the number 4, racialjustice.org. And even if you don't live in the city of Chicago or the state of Illinois, you can follow the things that we do on there. And I know Saru and Nataki is going to do a good job of closing us out and talking about some one fair wage specific actions.
Thank you.
Yeah, so,
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
no, so Wednesday, we're going to be at City Council. Please join us. You know, if you want to sign up for public speaking and everything, you're starting at 8:30 in the morning. We're going to be, our press conference starts at 9 after that?
9:30.
9:30 after that. So we will be in City Hall, and we will be introducing the ordinance for one fair wage. And definitely you can follow us at onefairwage.org. And also our office here in Chicago is in Hyde Park, 5113 South Harper, Suite 2022.
Thank you. Richard.
Once again, thank you all for taking the time to be here today for this panel. Wherever you're at, whatever state you're from, if you're interested in pushing one fair wage in your area, let us know.
Yeah, I would say the same, and just a couple of ways in which people who are not in Chicago can get engaged. On our website, onefairwage.org, and a related website that we also created called highroadrestaurants.org, you can actually find a list of restaurants that are paying livable wages right now. Wherever you are, there's a map, there's a list of states. You can find restaurants that are paying a livable wage. We want you to go to them and don't just support them and don't support others. We want you to use that list whenever you eat out, wherever you eat out, to go up to the restaurant owner, manager, not the worker, not your server, and say, hey, I don't see you on this list. I want to keep supporting. You're one of my favorite restaurants. I want to see you actually on this list paying livable wages with tips on top. And so can I put you in contact with this organization so you can learn how to raise wages profitably? Because we've got restaurant owners on our team who will help other restaurant owners learn how to make the change profitably. So that's one. Go to that list. Use it not only to support those restaurants, but to encourage other restaurants to join us. Number two is that we are running bills and ballot measures in half of the country. Things are probably happening in your state. Please get in. If you don't see your state on our website, please email me because we're probably in formation in your state. And if we're not in your state, you can still donate or come to places like Ohio and Arizona where we're collecting hundreds of thousands of signatures to put these issues on the ballot to change, I think, not just economic issues in November 2024, but I think, again, I'm naive and biased, but I think this issue could actually, with 3 battleground states where we're putting this on the ballot, Michigan, Ohio, Arizona, I think this could actually save our democracy. I think these states could actually flip. I think these states could, vote in the way we want them to because we're turning out the people who are always ignored by the party by putting their issues on the ballot. Thanks.
That concludes our discussion. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Richard. I know.
That was so. I had almost, that had just hit my mind while, how
I know.
and I was